Well, did you know that Chinese is the third most popular spoken language in Canada? We have over 1.3 million Canadians of Chinese origin, and we are eager as Canadians to make China a larger trading power with us. Well, here's an expert to help us understand what those dynamics are all about. Bob Fu, welcome to 100 Huntley Street. You are a global leader in the Persecuted Church in China. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you, Lauren.
So you heard my promo for China and how excited Canada is about doing business with China. Here we have President Xi, 3 years into his term. What do Canadians need to understand about human rights and China before we rush headlong into a growing relationship?
Lauren, yeah, I think we should all understand that President Xi Jinping for China and the party secretary for the past 3 years, under his leadership, the whole human rights record, including religious freedom and rule of law, had been the worst, I think, since the end of Cultural Revolution. In 1970s.
This is current. So it's not getting better in China for Christians. It's getting worse.
It's the worst. Really, last year alone, nearly 50,000 Christians were recorded persecuted, and over 3,500 were detained, and 303, according to our own record, were formally arrested.
And it is incredible because there's been a structure up there of the state church and the home church. And I just want to go to some pictures of crosses that are being torn down all across China. We've been watching this over the last. What's going on here on why on state churches you are taking the cross off? These are government-approved churches.
That's right. I mean, people would always think that government-sanctioned churches is supposed to be protected, legal. But President Xi will be recognized as the president of forcefully demolish and destroy churches. Over 2,000 crosses in the past 2.5 years were forcefully demolished, and some were burnt, and over almost 100 were totally even destroyed, because under President Xi's vision, really Christianity in particular should be contained, and especially with the biggest revival in the Chinese church.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how followers of Jesus are multiplying in China. We've got a chart that you brought us that shows the incredible increase. Are we at the same number of Christians as members of the Communist National Party?
Oh, we actually have more Christians than the number of communist parties. I mean, under
82 million Chinese party members.
Yeah, there are at least over 100 million Chinese Christians already now.
Why is he so afraid of the Christians?
I think, Lauren, it's ultimately, it must be a spiritual warfare, spiritual battle, because the darkness would not welcome light. I think, in the ordinary sense, you would think, well, Christians are the best citizens. I mean, they are carrying the needy, the vulnerable, the poor, all this social help. But at the same time, they have become one of the most persecuted groups. And why? I think, really, is because when Christians are doing all these good deeds, it shine a light on the darkness and depravity of the Communist Party.
I had no idea how depraved things had been in China until I read through your book, God's Double Agent. It is a staggering story what your mother went through to keep you, her children, alive. It's a staggering story how you had to flee because your wife was pregnant. But let's go back to Tiananmen Square. Here's you and your wife, a beautiful young student activists. How did God interrupt your life at Tiananmen Square?
Well, really, it was by His supernatural intervention and grace. I was kind of rather little naive young man, still believe the government can be reformed by your own effort. So that's how I was motivated to go to Tiananmen Square, organize the protest, and went, with my then girlfriend, now my wife Heidi, and multiple other our students from our university. And we thought, by having peaceful protest, the government might be willing to have a reform. But we met with tanks.
And it ended in a massacre.
Massacre.
And eventually you wound up in jail. How did Jesus Christ interrupt that despair? How did you meet Jesus?
It was a very, crisis, and with the despair and really disillusion because of the massacre and the crackdown. And it was during that moment God really intervened through a number of American actually missionaries who were teaching English in our English department. And they smuggled in some scriptures, some of the testimonies. And after reading that, I finally really totally touched by the kind of a supernatural testimonies of those Chinese pastors, and surrender my life to Jesus Christ.
What's worth that risk? What in the Jesus story is so worth that risk? Because you're not alone. Millions of Chinese have done this, taken Jesus as their savior.
That's right. It's just like what Jesus said, you always calculate a price you want to pay. And this is, of course, not a commercial transaction, and this is about life or death. This is about the good news of eternal salvation. How, much anything else you want to pay for this eternal salvation, this good news. And for me, I felt, the kind of this good news worth the whole life of me to really die for it.
The peace that Christ gives is greater than the physical safety.
Amen. Yeah.
Great picture of you here in one of your testimonies before Congress, where you are playing the voice of a persecuted pastor to Congress. How can we all help? How can we help our sisters and brothers in China suffering?
I think we can help our brothers and sisters by, number one, being informed. We oftentimes we need to know really their real names and know, go to our website, chinaaid.org, to kind of know their stories of persecution. I mean, just yesterday we just learned, a Christian was being tortured and abused, and after he was missing for over 1.5 years. And we should know their name. And secondly, we need to really present their stories to our community leaders, to our elected officials, as you just mentioned. We're not against the trade with China, but we can't only talk about the trade. We cannot trade our conscience with a few cheaper made in China products. We cannot, trade our values with a few Christmas trees, Christmas lights, many even manufactured by the hands of hundreds of political dissidents and even Christians in their labor camps. So we need to stand up. We need to tell our politicians, our prime ministers, our presidents that they need to, stand up for the core principle and fundamental values we stand for freedom, for democratic constitutional values that we are so proud of.
Bob Fu, the pastor to China's Underground Railroad, to a spokesman for both the state church and the multiple home churches. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for living as you do. Beautiful picture of your family here. Thank you. It's been quite a journey for you. Read more about it in God's Double Agent, and beautiful work, Bob. Let's keep in touch and go to our website. You can read more about China Aid there and how you can get involved to care for persecuted Christians in China.